All right, welcome everyone. This is part 3 of our multifamily homebuyer series. We had part 1, which was purchasing real estate and purchasing a home. Session 2 was with our lawyer and our lender. And today is session 3. This is on rehab and property management. We have Paul with us tonight. He works at Windham Windsor Housing. And I'll just, Paul, if you want to introduce yourself real quick, and then we can jump into it.
Okay, sounds good. My name is Paul Moderano. I'm the rental rehab program coordinator at Windham Windsor Housing Trust. And I'm here to present about property management and rehabs tonight.
Great. And we did have a second person, Ari Jackson, who's a property manager, but he has not been able to join us tonight, but we are in capable hands. So let me just start sharing the screen and we'll get started. Take it away.
Okay, so because I was supposed to be a two-peer person as usual. What I'll probably do is, if people have questions or whatever, I might just stop and ask if there's questions in between some slides or what have you, or if you have a question, you can raise your hand, do that bit. But I'll probably in between at some point, I might kind of stop at where it would have been a natural break for the two of us. And then, we'll go from there. So so we're on slide 2, right? Slide 2. So in the first, there I am, Paul Moderano. There's my contact information, email address, and that's my phone number, direct phone number in there. So if you have questions about anything later, you can feel free to email me about things and if I can respond, I will. So, all right. So in the first 2 courses, you talked about money markets. And the reason I wondered if people were actively looking, because if you are actively looking, then that the market is a little bit extraordinary, to say the least, these days. And so what does that mean? It means, some of the things, if you're looking for a single family house, things are moving really fast. The multifamily market is moving a little bit slower, but not, it's still moving pretty quick, comparatively speaking, to how this area generally works. So, if people are actively looking for, a home right now, a single family, how do you know, how are you deciding whether or not to get a single family or a multifamily? Some of the things you might have heard in this webinar, or just in your own, in the world out at large, is if you buy a multifamily, you have tenants that help you pay for the home. So if it's going to be a home owner occupied, different funding available for that sort of thing. But so hopefully you got a good grasp on what that's all about, because we're going to move towards like how do you find a multifamily unit, really. So what we want to try to determine is like, first of all, how do you decide? So what is what's going on in your life? Do you have any experience with property management, trades, customer service? A lot goes into property management. Property management is it's a people business. It's also, you gotta kind of have an idea of, a lot of times if you're working with contractors, you have to have an idea of how things work, how systems work in buildings. Of course, in this situation, talking residential, properties. So the systems are generally smaller and, more manageable for the average person. So, but you want to, if you are going to be a property owner occupied, or buy a couple of units to run, you want to think of it as a small business, and my whole thing is that if you're going to purchase, property management, if you're still looking, the actual property management begins in the hunt, really. When you're looking at the house, you're looking for houses, that's when you really start to, you need to have property management in mind when you're looking. So one thing you want to ask yourself before you even go in there is, some of the advantages that you might have are, like extra money to help with the mortgage. It might be less expensive to purchase the properties, and you can build equity. And in the sense that if you purchase a multifamily, when you move, if you decide to move out of it, if it's going to be an owner occupied, you can move out of it without having to worry about selling the property, which is another advantage that people, don't necessarily think of when they're buying it, right? So, should we go to slide 3? So I think we might actually be on. I think that was it, really. So we have. So like I was saying is that property management does begin at not sure if we're on the right. Can you just go back? Let me just see this one. Yeah, this one. It's just keep it on that one for now. Is that, like I was saying before, is that the property management begins when you're looking for the house. So some of the things that have to factor into your decision on the house are your personal skills. What do I know about property? What's up with this building? Are there things about this building that I need to know? And how do I find out those things? So you want to find some of the things you want to do in the beginning. You want to narrow your search down to a manageable geographic location. And you may have already heard this. I know you did actually hear this in this webinar before, is that you want to get yourself a real estate agent that's working for you, a buyer broker that you can be upfront with from the beginning. So if you have a buyer's agent on your side, one of the things about that is that you know how much money you have to spend, and you can be completely confidential with this person from the beginning. And that's a really important thing, especially when looking for a house in this kind of like a multifamily, because you may need some cash right away to get things moving. But another thing to do when you get into searching, if you haven't started already, is you got to have some time to do some searching, and identifying properties. When you do identify a property, I recommend get as much information from the websites as you can. So now you have a property, you look over the real estate listing, wherever you get them, Zillow or real estate agents' websites. Get as much information from them as possible. If you have a buyer's agent, they can send you more information, like they can get you, copies of the deeds and things like that. But before you even, really read, you can go out, take a ride by, take a look at the place, see what the neighborhood looks like. I always recommend drive-bys if you can do it. And like I said, in more normal markets, these kind of things are just things that you can do because houses aren't going to fly off the shelves, like they have been lately. But even so, like if things are kind of, flying off the shelves, if you really, this is a big thing. It's a big purchase, especially if you're going into to being a rental unit, because it's a responsibility that comes along with it that you need to be prepared for. And it's, so you don't really want to rush into it unless you have a few $100,000 you got nothing to do with and you just want to go buy a house with it, then go for it. But I would say look at the close proximity houses. What's the neighborhood look like? What are some advantages of the neighborhood? What are some advantages? Do I like this house? So just doing like a quick drive-by of the house, you can get a sense of that. And so, okay, we go to the next slide. So here's a house from that is for sale in Rockingham. Actually, it might still be for sale, I'm not sure. But it's basically the list price is $130,000. So there are some relatively inexpensive places. still around, but they're, they're what I would call a fixer-upper. And 3 years ago, this house probably wouldn't be $130,000 in this area, but it is right now. And so the thing is, you got to look at it in a situation in today's situation. So just from the pictures on the website and doing a drive-by, if you did a drive-by, of course we didn't, but you can look at the outside of this house, and what can you see on the outside of the house? Can you just tell me like some things that you notice? If people want to speak up, just put it in the chat or raise your hand. Just something that you see about the outside of this house that you can just tell from looking at it, and is it something that you can deal with? I can't see hand raising. If anybody has a hand up, or put it in the chat if you want.
Or feel free to unmute yourself as well.
Yep, windows of wood. Yep, good. It's got siding falling off. Yep. The roof looks good. Yeah, but the siding is a little tricky. So the siding is a little bit dodgy on this one. So you can see, if you could zoom in on it or whatever. The rents for a 3-bedroom are pretty low. Yep. Windows, some of the windows are closed off, which I didn't even. Oh, peeling paint. Yeah, peeling paint. So we could see, right? So the siding foundation might need attention, stucco, right? So it could, we don't know. That's something that you might have to look at a little closer. Where this house has tenants living in it, you probably don't want to go walking around the yard until you get your agent. But so just from looking at a drive-by and seeing this, you can see, you go to the seller's disclosure, which is something that you can get from the real estate agent. The windows are definitely not energy efficient. The siding needs work. And so if you see boards falling off a siding, what could that mean, right? So that could mean, well, it could mean that we had a big wind and a branch flew off, a tree nearby and knocked the siding off. Or it could mean that behind that siding, you have some trouble with the fascia wall, with the walls, the actual structure of the house can be rotting behind those clapboards, and so those are things just to gather, right? So okay, so you look at it and you think, okay, well, it's got a good roof. The roof looks like it's in good shape, but it's a slate roof, which is something to keep in mind, right? So now you say, this doesn't look too bad. I want to have a look. Price is right. I want to take a look. So you get those documents. The disclosure is important because the sellers can't, they have to tell you the truth. It's the rules. And so, you look at the disclosure, you can see when has anything been done to the house in the last, 10 years? How old is the heating system, or, is the roof, or it doesn't have the septic tank. It has town water and sewer. It's in the village. So so you can find a lot of things out from the disclosure, and the deed, is there any easements on the property? Anything I should know? Is the deed in some kind of a covenant with the town, or is there anything happening that I need to know about? You can look that over, but you say, yeah, sure, let's go for a walk. And so next slide. So you go for a walk. I just stole these next pictures off the internet too. But you go for a walk, and what I would say when you do go for a walk is bring a camera, which is usually in people's phones these days. And you want to take some pictures of the interior, right? So you look at this interior right here, some of these pictures that are just basically on the website as well, but you can look in the kitchen. You see the kitchen hasn't been updated in a while, because you can tell by the sink. You look at the sink and it's probably from, I don't know, maybe the 60s or 70s or something. It's a pretty old sink. So if that's the case, you can also tell, you look at the walls, you can see it's definitely probably horsehair plaster back there, which means that you probably have old plumbing you know, in there, and potentially old wiring and things like that. So this is just looking at the upstairs. But the, you know, where the systems really live are in the next slide, in the good old basement, right? So if you go into the basement, you always should go in your basement. Yeah, that's true. Who said that? Most renovations do, and foundation problems, mold or rot, are not usually. So that's why the basement is an important place to visit. You know, if you're going to look at a house, I've actually found, I thought it was really, for me, it was very unusual because I spent a good part of my life in basements as a plumber. And so, you know, I'm attracted to basements. So people that don't look in basements, I don't know. I just can't understand that. But you go in your basement. So in this picture, you're in the basement. So what do you see in this picture? You can just put answers in here. Good things, bad things. True. It's got a newer tank. Yeah. Yep, the oil tank is definitely new. It looks it anyway from the picture. I mean, it could be painted. People do that. We don't know if it's hard to tell, but the floor does look like it might be a little beat up, an old cement floor. The electric looks like it's, if you can see in the background, you can actually see some wires cut, back old knob and tube wiring that's been cut back there. So I think that it probably did have some electrical upgrades, but as Dan says, it doesn't look like it's been the neatest. It's not the neatest job. But the basement does look pretty dry for these parts, definitely. So, I mean, so some of the things that you want to notice too is like that one of the things that's actually a code now is that every oil tank needs to sit on a slab. So if you don't currently have oil heat, you might not know that. So that's, you know, that's something that you need to think about. You know, the oil tank does look pretty good. The boiler looks kind of old. But so what I would suggest, because there's just so many things, I mean, kind of the reason I'm actually trying to get people to look at things is that there's just so many things, right? So I kind of made this form along with a camera. You should bring a pen and this form or something like it. So if you go to slide 7, I'll just kind of talk you through the next few slides. So this is basically, so if you're going to look at the houses, right, what you want to have to do, so say you're going to look at 3 houses before you decide to make any moves, right? So on this one, you know, you can put the property address, the basic information, unit numbers. Is it a, you know, is it a brick house, or the square footage of the rooms, things like that. That's the first page, just to keep yourself sorted out, right? Organization is key in property management. So the next slide, so that's just basic demographics about the house. And so then the next slide, you go through, and these are basically, you know, your opinion, really. This is just you kind of going through here, because, you know, you think somebody mentioned, you know, home inspections, and we'll get into that in a few minutes, but this is just you doing your walkthrough. If you're going into a multifamily, you're going into a business, and so you need to think like a businessman or a business person, and think about everything that's going to be, you know, that's here, right? So we looked at the roof, and we can say, yeah, it's a pretty decent looking roof here, and so it probably doesn't need, you know, moderate repairs. But, you know, a slate roof, I would always, and we can talk about this, we can get into this in a few minutes. We will actually get into this in a few minutes. But slate roofs, they're beautiful and they last a long time, but they require maintenance. So that's something that you can say, yeah, it's in good shape, but never put that it doesn't need anything, because it always needs something, right? And then you know, you go down to the next, you know, the gutters, did it have gutters, didn't have gutters, windows, and these are all things that you can look at from the exterior, windows, and you can just rate them all, right? Do the windows need updating? Yes, in this particular house. Exterior doors, not energy efficient. They look a little shabby, just from the, you know, from the pictures actually. But the siding was bad. This foundation, actually, if you go back, if you looked at that basement, the foundation looked pretty decent. It looked like they had some pointing. But so you can see where the stones were. They've been pointed, but when you go in for your walkthrough, you look for watermarks. You look for mold, potentially mold here and there. But that's a pretty dry basement, which means that unless there's cracks anywhere, you're probably okay with the foundation in this house because it's dry and because some of those old stone foundations will last forever once they settle in. And this one has been repointed. Sometimes when I see repointing, I get a little nervous because that could be someone trying to hide something too, but it could just be trying to keep it drier. But it doesn't always do the trick. But so
Can you
just head back to the.
Paul, can you define repointing?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, repointing is when people go in and if you have brick, between the brick is mortar. Right, and if you were going to repoint a brick wall, basically you go in and you take out a little bit of mortar, and then you you fill it in with new mortar, so that when the mortar is drying up, so you get the old dried up mortar out, so that it doesn't crack and fall apart. If you ever see like bricks, brick walls mainly, they kind of brick foundations, you'll see bricks kind of collapsing. That's because the mortar in between the bricks is actually drying out. And kind of crumbling inside there, and so the weight is coming down, and so repointing will actually restructure the firmness of the wall. And so in a case with these old stone foundations, however, that was not put together with mortar. Probably it might have been, but that mortar is definitely has been put on after. I can tell just by looking at it, because you can see how it goes over the stones a lot. So when you put them in originally, you would try to keep the mortar between the stones, not actually all over the front of it. So somebody did something to that foundation, and we don't know why, but it's because it's pretty dry and the floor around it might look good. It's definitely something you'd want to look into if you see that. But I basically look for cracks in foundations when I'm doing a walkthrough like this, and if you don't see any stones falling out, you don't see any dirt. Like you'll see sometimes in these old foundations, you'll see it looks like dirt falling out between the stones, and you can, and that's actually the mortar crumbling. And so someone says, what signs of flood or water damage is a question Rajib asked, and some of the signs you can look for flood water damage in a place like this, where if it has regular damage, you'll actually see a line form on the bottom of the wall. So that would be a real bad sign, right? So if you see a line, that means it's a regular occurrence every spring or whatever. The water comes in and literally fills up the basement, with an inch or two of water, right? But sometimes the cracks in the floor and things like that, if you look around the cracks in the floor, you can see kind of water is an erosive element, right? So it will actually erode cement over time, So if it's just one flood that happened, you probably won't notice. But if it's a regular occurrence, you'll actually see like worn out spots. Like you can look for like little like divots almost, where you'll see like curves in the floor where water might settle. Cracks in cement floors. Generally, they didn't put a lot of cement, so it's not like concrete sometimes when they put those floors down on those basements. Is there a way to find a perimeter drain or footing drain in a building? You mean on inside the basement, an actual? I mean, you can have them. You can have people put perimeter drains. I mean, those are pretty. If someone has a perimeter drain, they generally have it. It's generally an external drain. If they don't have an external one, which is be like like kind of a well or something right around the edge of the wall, right at the foundation wall, where the foundation meets the floor, and the water is supposed to go in there and drain into a pump. So somewhere there has to be a sump pump and a hole, right? So, and a clean out in the wall, that's usually the clean outs in the wall are generally a plumbing. But if you have, like if it's attached to a piece of PVC or cast iron pipe, it's generally the building drain there. But if you have, so if they have I think I know what you're talking about. Those are not actually, if you have one of those, get rid of it right away, because they used to tie in roof drains to the main building plumbing. And so a lot of times you'll see like an extra Y coming off the drain going out of the house, right? And it's sometimes it'll just have a pipe. If it has a pipe that goes outside above the foundation, if it goes above where the drain leaves the building for sewage, then it's one of those old roof drains that they used to connect to the building drain. And the problem with those is that they're not always wet. And so there's no, and they don't have a trap on them. And so what happens is sewer gas comes back from either the septic tank or the sewer and drains back in up through, it comes back up through the pipes. Because especially in Vermont, a lot of times they have those, they don't even always have a building trap in Vermont, which you sometimes would see on, you'll see on the bottom where the main plumbing comes down. Usually there's like a trap and that'll go up. But a lot of times those drains were after the trap, or they just didn't even have a building trap installed with the original plumbing. And so, which is also can let sewer gas into your house if your traps dry out. But that's a whole other situation. But as for the floor drains, what you could look for, you can, I mean, one of the questions on a seller's disclosure, if you're trying to find out about, like, if they're trying to mitigate a water problem, one of the questions on a seller's disclosure should be, does this house have a water mitigation system? It'll say something like that. Or dry well. You can look outside and you can ask people if you see drains, going into the, around the outside of the house. A lot of times what they did in Vermont is they would put like a concrete skirt around the foundation, the outside of the foundation. And a lot of times if you see those, because that could be an attempt to mitigate a leaky foundation. But also that's the sign that I see in this house instantly is that they put mortar into that stone foundation at some time after it was definitely. It could have just been a repointing job because the mortar dried up, but it could also be trying to cover up something. But that's been there for a while. I can tell that's not new either, even just from the pictures. But did that answer your question? I don't know if the footing drain question. Is that what you meant? I'm not really too sure.
I think that was good, Paul.
Okay. So anyways, on this, you look at this. So from the pictures, you see that house. In that house, the chimney looked good. There was flashing around the chimney. So there was some work done. So they probably have been maintaining. So these are signs. You got to be like a detective, right? They've probably been maintaining that slate roof, because that means somebody has eyes on that roof enough to know that we need to flash the chimney. And that's all good stuff. And on a walkthrough, on the first walkthrough anyway, you don't have to go crawling around in crawl spaces or up in attics, which is what you would do if you went on a second visit, if you did that. But to look for, you can poke your head in the attic and look for leaky roofs and things like that, which would also go into your into these notes here. But the other main thing that you want to look for is fire. The fire escapes, does it have egresses and things like that? Because once you buy that house, you own the codes. So if you buy a house that doesn't have a second egress and you try to rent this to someone, even if the people are already there, it's a new owner now, you may get stuck with a you know, a code violation that says you got to put an egress in here, and you know, it could be a matter of you know, window. Granted, in Vermont, an egress is any window that someone can get to and a fireman can carry them out of. So I think it's 20 feet is what the code is in Vermont. So and that basically for ladders, they don't really expect you to jump out the windows. So if we go to hit the next slide, we can basically, this is, so this is like an interior one. So this one only has one unit. And what I would do is if you did want to use this particular one, you can use this sheet for each unit, right? And unit 1, unit 2, whatever. I didn't want to just put a bunch of blank sheets here, right? But the same thing, you know, pour, you know, the windows again from the inside. Do they need, you know, are they falling apart on the inside? Do they have storm windows? So if something is a single pane historical window that doesn't have storms, you know, I mean, you can almost say I'm going to have to put new windows. I'm going to have to do something. There are other options if you like historical windows, because some people, you know, want to keep them that way. You can look at the interior doors, the walls and ceilings. You know, is it all going to be interior stuff? How are the floors? I mean, because if you're going to be renting to people with, you know, you want safety, and, you know, broken up floors are also could be you know, potentially an issue if you're renting to people with, you know, Section 8, for instance. HUD comes in and sees a broken floor, you have to buy a new floor. You know, so these are all things that you just keep it in mind, because, you know, they're not necessarily, with the price of this house, a thing like that is not going to be a bargaining chip, right? So to speak. But, you know, the major appliances, it didn't look like those were, you know, energy efficient, up to date, you know, appliances. So these are all things you want to look for, right? So the water, I wrote water system here, you know, but basically you think about the plumbing, you know, like how does the plumbing look? In this case, you got the sinks were old. So I mean, in this case, like rating that for myself, I would say it needs repairs, right? And I would call that significant if I needed to, you know, because I don't think, you know, if the sinks and the fixtures are that old, we didn't even see the bathrooms. But if, you know, the fixtures are that old, the pipes are that old, so there's going to be some plumbing problems with this house within, you know, if you want to have a, you know, a good relationship with your house, you want to fix your pipes. I told you I was a plumber, but it didn't have, you know, there was no cooling system in here. Septic, like I said, is town. The electrical system, somebody mentioned earlier, it didn't look like it was done wonderfully. It looks like they might have just replaced some knob and tube wiring in the basement. And some of the things you can look for in the upstairs are old switches. You know, sometimes they have those little dial switches in the knob and tube ones, or the push button switches. So if you still see those switches in service, it's a bit, you know, it's kind of a thing that says, oh, maybe I have really old wires still in the wall. So in that case, you might, and you can pretty much, you can tell. And if you go through a lot of things, what they'll do in old houses to remodel houses with wiring is they'll put the wires, now they put the wires in the outside with that little molding strip, and they don't even put the plugs in the walls, and that saves a lot of money. But you know, so you can see if the wiring is newer anyway. This house, I would say no, the insulation does not have any insulation. I would probably, unless you see little holes in the siding, then maybe they blew in some insulation somewhere along the line. And that would also be something in the disclosure. So I think that's the, go to the next slide, just see where we're at. Yeah, so the basement, of course, is the big one. Does the house have a basement? Is there an exterior access? It's a question that I think about myself, because if you need to replace a tank or a boiler or something like that, an oil tank or a boiler, if it has an exterior access, that's going to actually save you some money in the long run, because if they have to come through your kitchen with an oil tank, it's going to be, you know, going to take them longer, and, you know, it's just stuff to consider, right? What kind of, you know, what kind of condition is the access in? Does it have railings? Railings are important in rental units because if it's a code, you have to have railings. They have to be a certain height. I believe I put a link somewhere at the end of this to the Vermont. There's actually the National Fire Safety Building, or the Department of Safety I might have linked you to. And you can find all kinds of codes there for building codes like that, health and safety codes. So those are kind of the things like you want to, look for code violations, because like I said, once you buy this house, you own the codes. And so the condition of the foundation, I said, I'd say that was it's in fair shape. Probably going to need work. You may need an exterior mitigation system if there's water in it. But if it's that dry now, if it's that dry, that's a good sign. That probably means you can probably control the situation relatively easy. You're not near water, like a pond or something. There's no nearby rivers or anything like that. And I believe this house is up on a hill too. So can you see the sills? If you can see the sills, I always take like you might have to feel a bit like a kook when you do this, but I always bring either like a screwdriver or something with me, and I poke a few sills and a few floor joists in the basement. Some of the things you want to look for, especially like floor joists and main beams and things like that, right? If you whack them with a screwdriver, make sure you bring a hefty one. You whack them with a screwdriver, and if you see dust, you might have a dry rot problem. It's a dry basement, but that could mean you have dry rot. So you want to, kind of whack a few, look around the sills. Do you see the joists falling away from the sills? Is the main beams, did they try to restructure the supports? Does it have, those extra iron legs, that you call them, whatever, to support the main beam? And then why is that a problem? If they did it and it looks like a good job, then that's fine, but if the beams are rotting, that's not fine. So you want to check them out, look at the main beams, look at the joists, give them a tap. You might have, also powdery, when you whack a beam, if you get powder, then you might have insects, right? So you want to look around for signs of insects and other pests that are in the house, because it's not so much that you don't like the little buggers, but they can cause a lot of damage to your house, and property in general. And so if that's actually something that you would want to find out from your if you do notice that, you can ask, is it a past problem, and what did they do to mitigate it, right? So these are questions you can ask your agent, if you have yourself a buyer's agent, because they can go dig into that stuff, because they don't necessarily, they have to tell you if you ask them, but it's good to have someone on your side with that one. All right, so you got your notes, you got your pictures, you bring that home, and you put it on your list. Okay, do you want this house, right? So then you have to kind of decide on how, is this house right for me? And so now you have some information on your side. Because when you're looking for a house, buying a house, it's emotional, there's a lot involved, it's a huge purchase, for most people, it's so really you can oversight, you see things, and that's why, I like to have notes, like, if you bring something along, it doesn't have to be this one, it can be anything, things that you want to look for, right? And taking pictures. So when you get home, you might write things on these notes, but anything you see that you want to, look into more, you want to have a picture of it. So, the siding, right? You can take pictures of it, and then you can zoom in on it at home when you're reviewing this house. So what you want to do is you want to get at least 2 or 3, maybe, in this kind of market, if you must buy a house in this market, you may not have a few options to do it. You may not have the time. If you have to do it and you only have one choice, then just really look at it really closely and then try to make a decision that way. So once you have the idea of what the house needs, want to hit the next slide. So this is, basically you can estimate your cost of what it might be, right? So then you say you found like the siding could be quite a bit of, you can that could be quite a bit of an expense, right? You know, if you had to reside or repaint it, you know, you could be talking thousands of dollars, you know, to do the whole thing over. So, you know, you can try to estimate what your cost might be. And then you want to look at before you actually make an offer, what, you know, so I got a rough idea what it might cost me to do the repairs on this house. And then you have here, you know, what do I have in my personal finances? What do I have for extra money after I buy the house? And how do you know? We're gonna look into that in a minute. I might after the next slide. So, you know, and you go through this, and is there any kind of grants that I might be able to get, loans? I know that in the last I was going to call it episode, the last webinar, Claremont Savings Bank, they offer rehab loans. Are you going to be eligible for one? Is your credit going to be stretched out to the max, and maybe you won't be able to even get a loan, you know? And so, so these are the kind of things. You have other lines of credit and things like that. So you want to just make sure that the whole picture is in your mind, right? So if you want to get to the next slide. So that's anybody have any questions on that part of looking at the house, you know, and trying to find the one you might want to look at, because the next thing we're going to be talking about is a different kind of a different aspect.
Well, I'm assuming we can send out this checklist.
Yes, yeah, please. Yep. No.
All right, let's move forward.
Yeah, we can move on. So once you have that, right? So now you got an idea of what you might want, you know. So what planning for renovation or repairs, I don't know if that's a great title for the next section, but I didn't have time to change it. But anyways, we can move on to the next slide. So, okay, so someone mentioned home inspection. So now you have an idea, right? And now I really think I want to buy this house. So now is when I call the home inspector, right? And the home inspector, and if I have particular questions, the home inspector works for you, right? So before I'm going to put a purchase, you know, you might say I'm going to put a purchase and sale and I'm going to make it contingent. And this is going to be one of my contingencies, right? You got town water and sewer, so you don't need a water test. But if you didn't, I would say water test, check the septic. Make sure you check all that stuff. You can do radon tests. You know, even your buyer's agent can do a radon test for you, or, you know, you can ask them to go in and do one. If you wanted to do one, they sell little kits. You can do that yourself even, but you make it contingent upon a home inspection now, because now it might cost you, I don't even know what home inspectors cost. That used to be about $500, might be more now. Let's just say it's 500. And these are some of the things that they're going to look at, right? And home inspectors, if you've never purchased a home, excuse me. If you've never purchased a home, what they'll do is they'll go in and they'll check this house from top to bottom. They will climb in the attic. You can go with them if you want, because they do work for you, right? So, and at this point in time, if you put a purchase and sale agreement, you make sure that you get your contingencies in there. You want to make sure, so if you think you need a loan, right? They must have talked about contingencies, but you know, this is part of the property management too, before you purchase the place. So if you think you might need a loan to do any repairs in the house, you want to make it contingent. You want some financing contingency in there that states that you may need a rehab loan for the siding. I want to get windows, you know, or whatever, right? In this case. And at least this gives you, first of all, it gives you, well, the contingency. If you can't get the loan, you don't want to buy the house because you're saying, I want new windows in that house, right? So, but also it's kind of like, well, you know, it gives you kind of some wiggle room if something, you know, if on the price maybe, right? So you're saying, all right, you know, whatever. This is when you make your offer, you would come in at this point with your purchase and sale agreement, and you would come in at this point, and they probably did talk about this, but I'll just go over it real quick. You go in and you make an offer and you say, look, I think the house needs this, this, and this. estimated cost, I'm gonna say right off the bat, would you guys accept, 125,000 or whatever, because I think the boiler is gonna be dead in 5 years, and this is gonna happen, and I really want to upgrade the apartments and, whatever. Right? So, and they're gonna say, well, that's why it's so cheap in the first place, and blah, 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 so they might come back, so you haggle that out, but definitely put on there that I want a home inspection no matter what, because before they go in and accept it, your price or not, you can still say, all right, I'll give it 130, whatever, but I want a home inspection. And so they go in and they'll write up a nice little report for you. And so if they didn't accept your thing and the home inspector finds something that's really dodgy that you didn't notice because you're not going to look at it like they do, then you can go back and say, well, here's my contingency. This is what he found or she found. And, I love the house, whatever. I'd love to buy it, but this is another chance for your negotiations to happen. And really, I mean, you don't want to just go in there and try to get things, but if there's some real issues and you think they're not things that you want to live with, then say, this is your time. You still have this time to negotiate, right? And that's what I mean about the contingency on the loan or whatever. Well, I can't get a loan for the windows, so would you guys knock 10,000 off? Whatever. So that's why that's important. So it's still the home inspector, but they don't come in if you're going to buy a multi-unit or even a single family house. Why pay $500 every time I look at a house? Because you might find that you don't want a lot of them when you look at them. So they're extra eye. They're professionals, and if you get a decent home inspector, you'll be surprised at what they'll give you. And they'll give you a report, read it over, and go back to your buyer's agent and negotiate, not or buy it. At that point. So okay, next slide. All right, so this is what a renovation looks like. Basically, this is where we were going to switch over. So here's. So here's a renovation that, and it's sort of an example, right? I mean, so when you're doing when you think about renovations, you say, oh, well, I just need to, I can insulate the floor or whatever, or, I'm gonna, put some insulation in, whatever you're gonna do, right? So this is kind of somebody that did this. And so what this example is, it's a person that, they had a commercial property basically, and they converted it into apartments, right? So they had a lot of work, but they didn't have it, and they're also going to be paying the utilities in these units, right? And I'll show you, there's a reason why that's going to happen. But so this is what it looks like to take the insulation out from the floor. They blew in the basement insulation, and that goes all along the foundation walls, right? And then he put a double, because he's paying the utilities, right? So he put a double layer, he pulled the old fiberglass out, and then he put a layer of fiberglass insulation right in the floor. That's about 8 or 10 inches thick, I believe, if I can recall. So want to get to the next slide? And so the reason he's going to be paying for the utilities is they're basically, he groups them, right? So what he did is he has this boiler, right? So the one boiler, which will probably be working all the time, in the winter, especially these days with this weather. This is a pretty good sized residential boiler. You generally don't see a boiler, but it's a pretty small, piece of equipment in general, in the scheme of things. But so basically what it is each unit is zoned off. So you see the little, where the pipes are going up, you see a little you see the yellow tags, just below the yellow tags, you see there's little green pumps. So each one of them, and that's how people can control their heat, right? So they turn their heat, the thermostat on, it turns one of them pumps on for each apartment or whatever, right? So the boiler itself is a hot water system. So the boiler is heating up water all the time, and people can call for heat anytime they want. But and in one way, this can be more efficient than having separate separate units for each apartment, because the water is, always hot. When people call for it, they always have heat, so it might keep the units warmer. And with the insulation, I'm sure the system works perfectly fine, right? And it's old, but that definitely has some life in it. And then he has and because that's a really good boiler, and he's got a good water heater, which he also shares with the apartments, 2 units. They're both 1 bedroom. So that's, if you think about a water heater, in a 3-bedroom home, basically, 1 water heater like that's a 50-gallon water heater. That'll cover easily, 3 to 5 people, and that thing will definitely give people enough hot water. He also pays for the water, and he keeps that. It's like a little utility room that he has access to pretty easily. And so with the insulation and the utilities condensed and consolidated like that, he's going to be paying for the utilities, and that would become part of the rent. And so in his equation, it works better that way, right? And so the next slides. So this is because it was a commercial building. Here's the old rooms. This was like an office. This is a shared bathroom that they had in the building, and they had like a little kitchenette type of thing for the office workers, whatever. And so that's what it looked like before. And then after, the next slide. And so this is what, and so this is the kitchen. So he took the kitchen and he put it's a small little galley kind of thing. You see there's kind of a small stove. The photos are a little squished too, but he's got a small stove in there, which is gas, which is, and the water heater is also gas. So the gas comes into the buildings, right? He's got new bathrooms everywhere, new floors, new fixtures. He added a laundry room for all the units, and that one on the left, right there is a bedroom. That was that old office that turned into a bedroom, right? And so this, all this work cost him $100,000. And plus, he did a lot of the work himself. He's the one that pulled up the insulation. He's the one that knocked a few walls down. He's the one that put the insulation in. I mean, he did a lot of work. He dumped trash. He really did so we call that sweat equity in the business. And he put a lot of it in there because it was in the middle of the summer too. So, but now he has 3 units, and that 100,000, is 100,000. He's going to be, over time, he'll make that money back. And the hope is that you get long-term tenants, and they, pay the rent on time. And we're going to get into tenancy in a minute. But so that's basically what you get for 100,000. Of course, you can't see the whole house, but he totally converted that house, that building, right, from commercial space into a residential. And so he put 3 bathrooms in, 3 kitchens, bedrooms, and a laundry room. So, and that's just kind of like the fixtures he used and things like that. So, okay. So, how do you get money for that sort of thing? All right. So let's look at let's go back to the whole bit of things, right? So we're going back to, we bought the house for 130. No, we can go forward to that. So this is basically what I've done is I broke down the cost. So let's say you bought the house for 130. I just wanted to give you an example of what a repair might look like, because we didn't see the bathroom. So you may end up putting bathrooms in, and we can go over what that might cost later. But so your basic price, so how are you going to pay for all this stuff, right? And like I said, he's going to make that money back and whatever. But using the example, because I don't want to dig into his example, but using the example of buying that house, we paid 130. We had to put 15% down. I'm going with it. This is like a conventional kind of mortgage thing. So that's 19,500. Closing costs 3,315. So cash to close on this property that you needed up front was $22,815, and you had to take a mortgage of $110,500. So that's the initial outgoing, right? And then it's a 2-unit building, and as somebody mentioned before, 700 does seem a little low. So I made the rent $1,000 a month for 2 units, and I'm actually going to do this as if you're one of the tenants, right? So there's 2 ways of looking at you being one of the tenants. And I know that people say, oh, you know, if you purchase a 2-family, then your rent will be lower. I say no, pay the $1,000 a month. If you're charging $1,000 a month to your tenants, and pay $1,000 a month to your house, right? So in this example, the budgeting is budgeting your money for property management and to run a small business, especially in the property business, is you have to look at your property as if it's the product, right? It's like your store. That's where you're making your money, right? And so it's an entity, and treat it like an entity of itself, as if you're an outsider, you know. And so the building itself, it already owes $110,000, right? $110,500. And so you're going to charge $1,000 per unit, and you're going to be one of that $1,000. So $2,000 a month go into the building's bank account. And so I suggest that if you're going to do this, that you get a building bank account, and you make that either a checking account or, you know, attach it to however you make payments. There's a number of ways to do that nowadays. You know, you're not going to get a lot of interest on this, but because it's a house, right? A house is a different type of investment. It's not like you're buying a stock or a bond or, you know, anything like that. A house is something that, first of all, it's real, it's there, right? And but it's also like as you put the money into it, it's money. It's like everything you're putting in, you're actually saving. Hopefully, if the price remains stable, if the price is stable, and that's, you know, and that's what you really, you know, people hope for in real estate, is that it's generally a stable investment, right? So as you're putting money into this house, you get $2,000 a month, $24,000 a year, right? And at the end there, I wrote vacancy rate 10%. And that's about an average of average of vacancy, how much vacancy you might have to deal with as a landlord in this area, say, right? Because people move out, people, you know, whatever. That's why long-term tenancy is better. Is this my internet is going wonky? Sorry about that. So the vacancy rate. So if you think about that, I mean, in real terms, think about the annual rate that you're going to save is $21,600, right? And so go to the next slide. Anybody got questions about that vacancy rate or anything new and exciting to you? Please. All right. So you basically, these are your payments, right? So your outgoing, so your payments that you have to pay, your mortgage is going to be $690, taxes $297. This is the monthly one, right? Your tax is $297. The water and sewer is about $125 a month. Insurance about $170, because you've only had 15. I kind of added like mortgage insurance in there too, so it might be a little high, but 170 is about what you'll pay for. In our area, about 10% is about a vacancy rate. To answer that question, before I get too far beyond it, and that's not annually, but if you may have a tenant for a year, and then, you know, or 2, and then if they move after the second year, it might take you a month or 2, you know, to get it fixed up again and rented. And so that's kind of how that vacancy rate is kind of figured out, factored in. And so it might not be annually. Hopefully it isn't annually, but but I always throw it in there anyway, so that you can, because you're thinking long term when you're thinking real estate, or I am anyway. Your annual total and cash reserves. So after all your payments, so your total cost of all those taxes annually is $15,390. So that actually leaves you, if you pay that $1,000, you got to have that discipline to pay your rent, right? But you're putting that money into your account, and at the end of the year, you'll have $8,610. If you had a tenant for a full year paying $1,000, and if you put your $1,000 in faithfully, right? So that gives you an operating budget of a monthly of $517. So I mean, here, I guess this is the kind of the good news. It's good news and bad news is that you don't really have to, if things go pretty normal, snow removal might cost you, like, let's just talk annually, $900. General maintenance, say $2,400 in a given year, and that's taking care of your heating systems and all basic stuff. And then apartment, if it does turn over, that would be like $1,800. So you want to keep about $1,800 if you have to turn it over. That's about the cost. So if that happens, and it cost you $5,000, you'd have, even with the vacancy rate, you'd have $1,000 left in your account at the end of the year. Now, should we just go out to go buy a ticket to Broadway and go see a play or something with that $1,000? You can, or you can keep it in the bank, which is what I would tell you to do, and keep your account so that now you're building up a buffer, right? Because bigger things can happen and bigger things can go wrong, So if we go to the next slide, does anybody have any questions about that at all? Or? No? All right. So, so some of the things that can go wrong, right? If your heating system breaks down, for instance, if you had a basic oil, that boiler that we saw in that basement, that's about a $5,000 boiler, right? An oil tank replacement nowadays is about $3,000. A slate roof, you can really on slate roofs, if you have to do a major repair on a slate roof, that's the upper end of the roof repairs. So when I say, and then the 40,000 part, that would be the upper end. If you had to really replace, slates were falling off the roof and you had to get up there and do a big repair. Sometimes you drive by a slate roof and you see like big patches of slates missing and things like that. Or if they don't have like snow glides or flashing for the snow to fall off, it'll pull tiles right off the roof. And so if you have to install those, that flashing in the hips and things like that, right? So you want so that could be the most expensive roof to do a major repair on. But a general asphalt roof, or a cheap asphalt roof, say a lower end 20-year roof, $10,000-$15,000, something like that, $10,000, $15,000, depending. Like I'm thinking about that house we looked at, that blue house. It looked like it. Roofs, they generally go by what they call a square, and that's basically a 10 by 10, 100 square foot section of the roof. And the roof on that house is an easy roof. There's not a lot of dormers and things poking out of it anywhere, and there's no hips and gullies and things like that. So it's a pretty easy roof to fix. So, if on that roof, you might be even lower than if it wasn't slate. If you took the slate off and put a cheaper asphalt roof on there, you can do that. But the historical value is obviously lost and things like that. Put a new bathroom in, just replacing just basically, floors, walls, ceilings, fixtures, $5,000. You can probably get away with it. If you want to get fancier, you can get fancier. But when you're doing these things, for instance, if you have up and down, if you're fixing like if you're replacing pipes in, if you're fixing the second floor, you want to do as much work as you can, like the rough end type of plumbing and electrical work. And so it might end up costing you a little bit more, 5, 6, 7, 10,000. It depends on the fixtures you use, of course. Because you can spend, $1,000 on a faucet, if you wanted to get crazy. A kitchen's going to cost you probably $10,000. Siding, if you had to re-side that house, it'd probably be around maybe $20,000 on the stab in the dark there, because if you're going to try to replace the wood and paint it and all that, or if you're going to put a vinyl siding, So these are just some numbers to keep in mind, right? If you replace windows, basically average cost for a replacement double pane energy efficient window would be about $400 a window. If you're gonna do, I wrote energy efficiency there, like if you're gonna blow in insulation in the basement or something like that, you're looking at maybe $6,000, or upwards. It depends on if you do the attic as well. So like that particular, the one we looked at, that basement where you blew in all that insulation, that was about $6,000. And then the electrical upgrades can cost you quite a bit. That was probably a 100 amp system. So if you want to get into the modern era and put a 200 amp system, which will run more air conditioners, it'll do like things like if you wanted to put central air in, you can put more 220 fixtures on there if you have a 200 amp system, things like that. And if you're going to rewire an electrical work and run, from small repairs to major rewiring jobs, I mean, it could be $15,000 to do a whole rewiring, adding outlets everywhere and, making the house upgraded. So, but all those things, they might be big costs, but they last a while, right? So when you do put the money out, that's why I say, if you do it with the good stuff, use good equipment. Don't have to get the most expensive, but you want to make sure that you do it right first, and you don't have to go back and do it again. But so that money that you're saving over the years, right? So what you do is you try to think about, okay, the budget that I have, I'm able to put $1,000 a month away, right? From my rent into this account, right? So if I know that nothing's, there's no immediate danger, I can just keep putting it in, right? Because you want to build up something. You want to have a nice buffers, at least like say half of a roof, that you can pay up front. Because if you've got to have a new roof, they're going to want cash up front. And if you have cash in your bank, you'll be much happier when the roofer says, I need $8,000 to get started. And so that's why that money in there. So you kind of put that money aside, right? And once you build it up after a few years, though, you can decide, well, geez, that looks like nothing's going wrong. Maybe I can pay down my principal, right? And so you can pay down your mortgage quicker. You can put your money directly towards the mortgage. You pay extra money towards your mortgage every month. And try to pay off your principal. And if you get the house paid off faster, that would, get that principal paid down, then your equity is building up faster, right? So if you can get it paid off, that's another thing you want to strive for. And that's why I say, make yourself a tenant and get that money from each unit that you can get. Get the most money out of each unit that you can get within reason, right? And so, okay, next slide. Any questions there, or am I talking too fast, or?
You're very knowledgeable. I'm sure people will have questions once it sinks in.
Okay, well, and it's a lot of information. I know. It was kind of a tricky one because it's really only touching the surface. But okay. So all those things, wow, geez, what if I have to, lay it on the outside and, is there any help out there for you? Well, there might be, it depends. The Windham and Windsor Housing Trust has a couple of programs. If you're owner occupied and you have one unit, you can get, there's our income guidelines to some of our programs, but other programs there's one coming up that we should be unrolling soon this year. Called the Vermont Housing Initiative Program, where you can get up to a $30,000 grant to pay for to get a vacant unit up to code or to make it habitable. So if that means upgrading the heat and doing all this stuff, and in exchange, almost every one of these programs, there's a sort of an exchange for this kind of thing. In exchange for that, you rent to folks from Continuum of Care. And and that's a whole other thing. If you're interested in that program, it is on our website. You can go to it. It should be a link to that website. If you're interested, you can always email me and say, well, I'd be interested, and I already own a house and I'm wondering. The units do have to be vacant though for that particular program. But if it's a 1 unit, if you own it yourself, it's a single family home or a 1 unit, you can get the Green Mountain Home Repair loans, which is a low kind of barrier loan for people that also that you have to have there's a ton of paperwork. So when I call it low barrier, you'd be like, I don't curses that guy, but no, this is, but you can get these loans to, through us to fix your house, to make certain repairs. There's also a purchase and rehab program that we also have that there's a limit to the amount that you can pay for that house, for instance, that we looked at, which is, I think the limit is $175,000, which there doesn't seem to be too many out there like that. I believe you can get like a 1 unit multifamily, a 2-family house, and you can use this purchase and rehab grant. With that also, there's, I believe it's a shared equity program, which is a whole other situation that you'd want to look into. And the person that Kayla, who did the first webinar, would be a person that can, you can get answers from her on shared equity. But if you just go to our website and look for that program, you can get information on that one, right? So those are a couple of things that we offer for people that are, trying to buy a house. But that particular one can be okay if the shared equity is right for you. You can get the down payment. You can get almost up to $60,000, I think, for a house. I think it's 20% of the purchase price plus a $30,000 grant to do a rehab. So it's a pretty decent program. But the way you pay it back is through the shared equity program. So it's very detailed, and I'm not going to get into it right now because I don't have the time. But you can look into it anytime on our website. And the next people down the list are the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, which I have a link. Did I give you that page with all the links, Sarah?
Yeah, I'll send it. I can send it all out after.
And I have links to all these places that I'm mentioning at least, and then maybe some others. But the Vermont Housing Conservation Board, they have a lead abatement program, and they got a big grant from Opera, and they're trying to get rid of all the lead in Vermont, and they will give you. They have different programs for single family, multifamily, 2 unit, 3 unit. It's also pretty complex. You have to agree to rent at fair market rates for, I think maybe the lender, it's a loan, but it's a deferred loan, which actually is forgiven annually. And it's basically terms, they'll give you money to remove the lead from inside and outside the house. You don't have a choice of whether to do one or the other. If they find lead, they're gonna go in and get it. And they'll give you a loan for it, and sometimes the loan can be scary, but every year they deduct 20% of that loan. As long as you own that house for 5 years and you remain the owner and you agree to terms and you stick to those terms, 5 years later, the loan's gone. So it's basically a grant, but it takes 5 years to get it. The other people, SEVCA, people might know SEVCA, Southeastern Vermont Community Action, also income guidelines, but they will help people with energy efficiency programs, heat situations. I know that they've replaced oil tanks for people that I know and referred them to. They do all sorts of stuff. SEVCA is a pretty wide range, but one of the big things they do is insulation stuff. So if you or your tenant qualifies and you don't have any insulation in your house, or I don't believe they do windows, which is why I kind of have these other ones. But they'll come in and they'll do like a blown insulation type of thing, and they'll do a lot of different things. They'll add like, things that you don't even think about. They'll put vents in your bathrooms if you don't have the right vents. They'll fix some code violations. But they're also limited, but you also have to meet some income guidelines because they get a lot of their funding from the Department of Agriculture, I believe, or HUD. One of the two, whichever one it is one of the federal agencies, but there's definitely guidelines that you have.
Hey, Paul, I just want to do a time check. We got about 15 minutes, so I'm not sure.
Oh, no, really? I was worried I didn't have enough to say. And Efficiency Vermont is like a private organization. You can get energy efficiency loans, tax credits, things like that. 3 Thermal will give you, mostly they work with people with 3 units or more. They'll come in and help you with energy efficiency, windows, all kinds of stuff. And they'll help you with project management. They find credits, tax credits for you and things like that. All the basic information is on the sheet that I gave Sarah, and she'll mail that out to you. And so you can check any of them out, but there is help out there for people if you're if you are interested in a fixer-upper. You're not on your own. It's fun. So I think the next slide is pretty much. So any final tips on property management? This is really, does anybody here have anything they want to add, subtract, or say about what they might know about property management, what they, any questions they might have, so it's kind of like question and answer time right now. There's a couple of different things that, the final tips, basically, like I said, keep it as a business, keep that in mind. The next thing is one of the things that you have in property management is, if you want to hit the next slide, I'll just quickly, finding tenants, big one, right? So I'm not going to say much about this. You have to come back next week, 2 days, right? What is it? Thursday, right? Where we have another webinar, and we'll be doing a lot more talk about tenants and how to find them, hopefully, and tenant relations and things like that. So that will be next week. Next slide. Questions and answers.
I think this is a good time if people feel comfortable unmuting and asking any sort of more specific questions. I know Paul did a really great job of going into a lot of detail, but there might be some follow-up questions. And I see Lena, you've unmuted if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, I was just curious, in times when things aren't moving so fast, it's easier to do due diligence, right? It's easier to kind of explore and check a property out and so forth. Would you recommend in a market like this, basically getting under contract as soon as possible, but having contingencies in there for inspection and so forth, and just knowing you're going to be spending money on those things as the cost of doing business right now?
Well, there is a couple ways to look at it. If you have, you can call up a real estate agent right now from the website and say, I want to put an offer in on that house, and I want to make it contingent upon, I'll pay what they want, and you don't have to do any of this. And you can say, but I want to have a home inspection. But what I would say, and if they don't want to do that, I personally, I wouldn't. Yeah, I wouldn't do it. I would, a market like this, I would say, if you're, I don't want to sound like discouraging, but you want to make sure that you can be somewhat cautious. I would definitely not rush into personally, I wouldn't rush into a $200,000 purchase, not knowing what I'm getting into. A home is something that you're going to be in, and if it's going to be a rental unit, one of the things about a rental unit is that I thought I might have mentioned this, is that, it's something that you can have even after you move out of it as an investment. So it's something that you can keep for, your lifetime. So if you can't get one right away, then so be it, I would say. And just, but I would definitely not rush in and let the market bully you around. That's my advice. And that's kind of what, that's kind of what happens, unless you have a lot of money and you just want to get rid of it, and dumping money into an old house, you can get tax credits for doing certain things, and you can do that if you have this money in cash. If you're able to buy it on cash, buying it, if you tell them you want to buy it cash, but I would still get a contingency anyway, like I would. So.
Great.
Did that answer the question? Bring up more.
Great. Ben?
Yeah, anything like the house in your example? I've actually been eyeing it. It's been on the market for like almost a year though, and that alone just makes me like, Like, how do you find out what's like actually wrong with a house before, there's some reason it hasn't sold, I assume. But is that, I mean, at this point, like if previous people have had home inspections done, and if I'm coming along after, I mean, is there any way to like, I mean, not have to repeat that effort, or do they have to disclose anything that was found in a previous home inspection, or?
That's a good question. No, they don't. That's why they do not. A home inspector works for the other buyer or the other person to put an offer in. And so that home inspection actually belongs to that person. So they can't really say anything. And that's, you could feel about that however you want to feel about that. I have my feelings about that myself, but you're right. And the thing is, I've been in mechanical businesses for quite some time, and I know that about your own car, right? Anything mechanical can break down at any time. So even going through all this, you still don't know. I mean, things can still go wrong, right? Things can always go wrong, and they will go wrong, but going in and doing all this, really the main thing of this is kind of trying to get an idea of anything major. And that's why I brought up the cost of some of those major fixes, rehabs, because those are the things that you really want to worry about, like things like, even a boiler, I mean, that could happen in a weekend. Your boiler can break down and a guy can come in and put a new boiler in, and before you know it, you just $6,000 less in your life. But so like those aren't even the major things. So the major things you want to make sure about your house is, does it have a good foundation? The energy efficiency part is huge nowadays because of what's going on in the world. And, you want to make sure that if your house can be converted to maybe in the future, the type of energy that we might have. If you have, a well enough insulated home in New England now, you can have a heating and air conditioning unit, which was unheard of, 20 years ago. So the insulation has gotten better. So some of the main things, just the foundation is good. Those joists, whack those joists down in the basement. Make sure your supports are working, going to be, and not rotting out. The sills look good. Those you can see from the outside. And the roofs, if you got a good foundation and a good roof, and there's no rot anywhere on the outside around those parts, then, well, anything can be fixed, but those are the main things. Because if you have to start lifting up the house and stuff, but it's a tricky business nowadays because it's really fast.
Great, thank you. Any other questions for Paul? And we will, Dan, go for it.
Hey, Dan.
Hi, Paul. Great job. And I sort of want to use this as an opportunity for a segue to the Thursday event, but it's basically to add a question for everybody, including you, which is to think about the consequences of two really important licensing requirements that are different in Vermont anyway. And you probably know what I'm going to say. Property managers are not required to be brokers, real estate brokers, or we don't have property management licenses in Vermont. So that's one thing to think about. Granted that there are people who have property management businesses in Vermont. And the other is relevant to the numbers you were talking about. The general contractors also are not required to have licenses. And this is only as a buyer beware kind of comment, just to think about, but there's pretty widespread differences in Vermont specifically.
Yeah, that's definitely true. A lot of the main licenses in the construction business that I know of that are definitely, you have to, to do plumbing, and it's not even
Sure.
all plumbing. But it's, if you cut into the drains or the water pipes, you have to have a license. And an electrician, if you, I mean, I can go into a house now and call myself a general contractor, property manager, and start replacing people's fans, and I don't know anything about those, right? So, I mean, I really do, but it's like, I don't need to know anything about it, but, and I can do a lot of other things too, and so those are some of the things I did put I think I put a link to the Department of Safety, because some of the codes that you do need to be concerned about as a property owner or rental of a rental unit is the fire safety codes. And those are the ones that if you're gonna do any kind of major remodeling, and I don't know if I gave the whole thing, but if you go to the Department of Safety website, there's a bunch of links on there. And those are about the only real set of codes that are accessible and pretty much accepted everywhere on rental properties. If you're a single family, you want a single family house, you can do anything you want in there. I mean, I can go into a house if I owned it and just start, replacing the plumbing or the electric, and I don't have to do it. If it's a single family house, I don't believe I have to do anything. I don't even know
That's
if I
for
need to.
Vermont, really, right?
That's all Vermont. Yeah, Vermont, New Hampshire's the same way. I know that because I work there as well. But Massachusetts is not, because I also work there, and I can tell you that they want permits for everything, and you need a license for just about everything there. But yeah.
Paul, there's a question in the chat. Is there a way to find any load-bearing walls that have been removed or modified?
Okay, there is. If you go in the basement, what you do is you can look for. Well, first of all, if you find a really old house with a wide open space, I'd be suspicious.
Yeah.
But you want to go in. If you go in the basement and you look for those main beams, which would be the thicker ones, of course, right there. Usually in old houses, they're old giant trees that they cut down and put in there sometimes. So if you look for those and you see which way they're carrying the house, right, and like that blue house, I would assume they have probably 3 of them going across the shorter, I don't know which way you'd call it. It's not horizontal or vertical, but I guess the short way. They probably have like a few of them going down that way, right? So above those main beams are where most of your carrying weight will go, right? So the walls that are built on top of those beams are carrying walls. You can remove those as long as you can put a header in, and I mean, you can expand your kitchen and open it up if you want. And if you have a carrying wall, you just have to make sure that you carry the weight around in a header. So you can actually remove them. So if you see headers, header is basically a box, right? Which would be cut into into joists somewhere or something like that. It would be just like a square or a rectangle in the system of joists, right? In the basement is the main place you'd see that happen. But you can do it if it was a 3-family or 3-story house or something like that, or upstairs. They could put those in the ceiling as well. But what those do is they take the weight, they put it in, and they distribute the weight around the rectangle, basically. And so that now becomes the carrier. And so if they did it right, then you don't have any problem. It'll stay there for as long as a beam. But they also need to support those beams that they chop, and that's one thing to look for. If you see a beam cut, you want to make sure that there's some kind of support, especially if it's like one of those main beams. If someone cuts one of them 8x8s or something, that's kind of scary. That needs to have their own new supports everywhere with a header, and but like Dan said, builders don't need a license, so anything can happen out there. So that's why I go through this when I talk about due diligence, especially in the North Country, but anywhere you go, it's they didn't always have codes in Massachusetts, and so there was people that did things down there in some of them old houses. If you're dealing with old houses, you really never know what you're going to find. And so to answer that other question, I'm sorry to say, you really never know what you're gonna find. So that's why due diligence is important. Personally, I wouldn't rush in to buy a house. I would, do what you feel comfortable with. Because if you don't feel comfortable doing it, then, it's not gonna be fun. It can be a fun thing to do, really. I mean, it could be a great, it could be great, fun. It's your house, you're looking at it, it's like you're having your bank account to live in. So it's.
Well, I think
so
that, go ahead, Paul.
No, that's it. I was gonna say, I think that could be a good final word.
Yeah.
Living in your piggy bank and.
I was actually going to say that. I think that's a great image to close on. It is just past 7, so I do just want to be mindful of people's time. But Paul, thank you. You're full of knowledge, and I'm sure you'll probably get some emails from individuals just asking some follow-up questions. So I will send out the recording tomorrow along with the presentation and that inspection sheet and basically all the materials that Paul has shared with me. So you can all utilize that. And don't forget, our 4th and final is on Thursday with Dan, who's here, and then Jeff and John Dunbar, who are property owners, property managers, and we're going to be talking about tenant relations. So you need someone to fill those rooms. And how to go about doing that, and it should be very interesting. So thank you, everyone, and we'll hopefully see you Thursday.
Okay, thanks everyone. Have a good
Take
night.
care.